You're always the embarrassment, my family said every holiday. So when I bought my dream condo, I threw a huge party and sent invites to everyone but them. They found out on Instagram. The comments were glorious. I, 29M, always knew I was the black sheep, but hearing my sister announce at Thanksgiving that I was always the embarrassment while the whole family nodded along was my breaking point. Growing up, nothing I did was ever good enough. While my older brother sailed through medical school and my sister climbed the corporate ladder, I struggled through community college and worked retail jobs. Every family gathering became a showcase of their achievements while I sat there, invisible except when someone needed a punchline. My parents would introduce my siblings with pride, rattling off their accomplishments to anyone who'd listen. When it came to me, the conversation would shift awkwardly, or they'd mention I was still figuring things out. I was 29 and apparently still a work in progress. The worst part wasn't the constant comparison. It was how they made me feel grateful for their tolerance. My mother would pat my shoulder and remind me that family was everything, that they loved me despite my shortcomings. My father would slip me money sometimes, always with that pitying look that made my stomach twist. But I wasn't lazy or incompetent like they assumed. While they were building their prestigious careers, I was quietly learning web development online, taking freelance projects, and saving every penny I could. The retail job was just to keep food on the table while I built something bigger. 2 years ago, I landed my first major client. Then another. Soon I was pulling in more money than I'd ever imagined, but I kept quiet about it. I stayed in my crappy apartment, drove my beat-up car, and let them think I was still their charity case. The condescension reached its peak last Thanksgiving. My brother was going on about his latest research publication while my sister complained about having to find a bigger house because her promotion came with another salary bump. Then my cousin asked what I'd been up to. Before I could answer, my sister jumped in with that familiar tone of fake concern. She told everyone I was still working retail, still living in that tiny apartment, still trying to figure out what to do with my life. Then came the kicker. She looked right at me and said I was always the embarrassment at these things, but family stuck together anyway. The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds before everyone moved on, leaving me sitting there with that familiar burning sensation in my chest. But this time, instead of shame, I felt something else, determination. I'd been planning to tell them about my success eventually, maybe when I hit some arbitrary milestone that would make them proud. That night, I realized I didn't want their pride anymore. I wanted something much better. The next Monday, I started house hunting. Not just any house. I wanted something that would make a statement. After 3 months of searching, I found it, a stunning 2-bedroom condo in the city's most exclusive building, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, amenities that read like a luxury hotel brochure. I paid cash. The day I got the keys, I stood in my empty living room and started planning the party of a lifetime. Not just any party, a housewarming celebration that would be talked about for years. I hired the best caterer in the city, the kind that usually worked celebrity events. I booked a bartender who specialized in craft cocktails and had him create a custom menu. I brought in a small jazz ensemble and had the place professionally decorated with flowers that cost more than my family spent on Christmas presents. The guest list was carefully curated. College friends who'd stayed in touch, co-workers from various jobs who'd become genuine friends, neighbors from my old apartment building who'd always treated me kindly, and several clients who'd become more than business contacts. People who knew the real me, who valued my work, who'd never made me feel like an inconvenience. The one thing missing from my guest list was family. I sent out elegant invitations 3 weeks in advance, making sure to mention the address prominently. I posted cryptic hints on social media about a major life update and celebration. I wanted the anticipation to build. 2 days before the party, my mother called. She'd heard through some mutual connections that I was throwing a party and wondered why she hadn't received an invitation. I told her it was just a small work thing, nothing fancy, and she seemed satisfied. That satisfied feeling didn't last long. The party exceeded every expectation I'd had. 50 people showed up, and the energy was incredible from the moment the first guest walked through the door. Everyone was genuinely excited to be there, asking about the place, complimenting the view, and celebrating with me. My former neighbor brought her daughter, who was studying web design, and I spent 20 minutes giving her career advice. A college friend proposed to his girlfriend on my balcony, with the city lights as backdrop. My biggest client pulled me aside and offered me an exclusive contract that would set me up for the next 5 years. But the best part was simply being surrounded by people who were happy for my success, who didn't act like it was some miracle that I'd managed to accomplish something meaningful. I documented everything. Every toast, every laugh, every moment of genuine celebration. The photos showed the stunning space, the happy faces, the obvious success of the evening. And yes, I posted them all on Instagram. I didn't tag anyone from my family. I didn't send them direct messages. I just let the posts speak for themselves. Here was their embarrassment, throwing a party in a condo that probably cost more than their cars combined, surrounded by people who clearly respected and cared about him. The first comment came from my brother's wife within an hour. She wanted to know whose place this was and how I could afford to be there. I didn't respond. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing constantly. My sister had figured it out and was demanding to know why she wasn't invited. My mother was hurt and confused, asking how I could afford such a place and why I'd kept it secret. My father, always the practical one, was asking pointed questions about my finances and whether I needed help with something I'd clearly gotten in over my head with. The comments on my Instagram posts told the real story, though. Friends congratulating me on the amazing space and the incredible party. Colleagues expressing genuine happiness for my success. Clients talking about how well-deserved this celebration was. And then there were the comments from family friends and extended relatives who'd been at those humiliating holiday gatherings. They were putting pieces together, realizing that the family embarrassment had been quietly building something impressive while everyone else was busy looking down on him. My cousin, the one who'd asked what I'd been up to at Thanksgiving, left a comment that made my whole week. She said she'd always suspected I was underestimated and was thrilled to see me proving everyone wrong. The phone calls intensified over the next few days. My sister was furious, accusing me of deliberately embarrassing the family by flaunting my success instead of sharing it. My mother was hurt, wondering why I felt like I couldn't trust them with good news. My brother was skeptical, suggesting I might be in debt or involved in something questionable. But the most revealing conversation was with my father. He asked me directly how much the place had cost and seemed genuinely shocked when I told him I'd paid cash. Then he asked why I'd felt the need to exclude them from something so important. I told him it wasn't about excluding them from something important. It was about celebrating with people who'd never made me feel like celebrating my achievements was presumptuous. The real vindication came 2 weeks later when I got a call from my aunt. She'd been at my sister's house when my mother arrived, upset about the whole situation. According to my aunt, my mother had spent an hour complaining about my secrecy and lack of family loyalty. Then my sister made the mistake of pulling up my Instagram post to show my aunt what I'd been hiding. My aunt looked through the photos, saw the beautiful space and the obvious success of the party, and asked a simple question: why hadn't they been happy for me? My aunt told me that question had stopped the conversation cold. My mother couldn't answer it. My sister got defensive and started listing all the times they'd supported me. But my aunt pointed out that support was supposed to make someone feel built up, not constantly apologetic for existing. The conversation apparently ended with my aunt telling them that maybe if they'd spent less time being embarrassed by me and more time being proud of me, they would have been invited to celebrate with me. 3 weeks after the party, my brother texted me. He said he'd been thinking about things and realized they'd treated me unfairly over the years. He asked if we could meet for coffee and talk. I agreed, curious to see if this was genuine reflection or just another attempt to smooth things over without addressing the real issues. The coffee meeting was awkward but enlightening. My brother admitted that he'd always felt pressure to be the perfect son and had dealt with that pressure by making sure I stayed in the role of the screw-up. It made him feel more secure in his position as the successful one. He apologized, and it seemed genuine. But then he asked if I thought I might be ready to move past this and start including family in my life again. I told him that moving past it wasn't the same as pretending it never happened. They'd spent years making me feel like my presence was something they tolerated rather than enjoyed. Now they were upset because I'd found people who actually enjoyed having me around. Update 1. 6 months later, the family dynamics have shifted in ways I never expected. My success became impossible to ignore when a local business magazine featured me in an article about successful young entrepreneurs. The piece included photos of my condo and detailed my journey from retail worker to six-figure freelancer. My parents framed the article. My mother posted it on her Facebook page with a lengthy caption about how proud she was of her son's determination and success. The same woman who'd spent years making subtle digs about my lack of direction was now bragging to her friends about my achievements. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it also didn't fill me with the satisfaction I'd expected. Watching my mother try to retroactively claim pride in accomplishments she'd never supported felt hollow rather than vindicating. My sister reached out with what she called a real conversation about our relationship. She acknowledged that she'd been condescending and admitted that part of her behavior came from her own insecurities about whether her corporate success made her happy. The conversation was more honest than any we'd had in years, but it also made me realize how much damage had been done. She was asking for forgiveness for years of making me feel inadequate, but she was asking as someone who still didn't really understand what that inadequacy had felt like. The most telling moment came when she suggested we put everything behind us and start fresh. When I asked her what accountability looked like for years of hurtful behavior, she seemed genuinely confused by the question. My father's response was the most surprising. He called me one evening and admitted that he'd failed me as a parent. He said he'd been so focused on pushing me to be more like my siblings that he'd never stopped to see who I actually was or what I was capable of becoming. The apology felt more genuine than the others, but it also came with an expectation that acknowledgement of wrongdoing should lead to immediate reconciliation. Update 2. A year after the party, I hosted another celebration, this time for my business partner and me landing our biggest client yet. This party was even more elaborate than the first, with twice as many guests and coverage from a local lifestyle blogger. This time, I did send invitations to my family. Not because I'd forgiven everything or because the relationships had been fully repaired, but because I wanted to see how they'd behave when they were included rather than excluded. The results were mixed. My parents came and were gracious guests, though I caught my mother taking photos of every corner of the apartment to show her friends later. My brother brought his wife and seemed genuinely happy to celebrate with me, though he spent most of the evening talking about his own recent promotion. My sister initially RSVP'd yes, then canceled the morning of the party, claiming a work emergency. Later that week, I found out from my cousin that she'd been at a different party the same night, one thrown by her boss for their department's quarterly achievements. The evening felt like a test that revealed exactly where I stood with each family member. My parents were proud of my success, but still fundamentally saw it as something that reflected on them rather than something that belonged to me. My brother was supportive but still competitive, needing to make sure his own achievements stayed prominently in the conversation. And my sister was still treating my success as somehow less legitimate or important than achievements that came through traditional channels. But the most important realization from that second party was that it didn't matter as much as I'd thought it would. The first party had been about proving something to family who'd never believed in me. The second party was just about celebrating success with people who cared about me, and whether family fell into that category or not was up to them. Update 3. 2 years have passed since that first party, and the family dynamics have settled into something I never expected. Casual indifference from my side and persistent attempts at connection from theirs. My mother calls regularly now, always with some story about how she's been telling her friends about my latest success. She forwards me job listings she thinks might interest me, apparently not understanding that I'm running my own business now and doing better than any of those positions would offer. My father has started asking for my advice on technology issues, treating me like an expert for the first time in my life. It's nice, but it also feels like it took me becoming financially successful for him to see me as competent in any area. The relationship with my siblings has evolved into something more honest, but also more distant. We're polite at family gatherings. We exchange pleasantries about our careers, but the deep trust that was broken during all those years of condescension hasn't been rebuilt. My brother has made genuine efforts to include me in his life, inviting me to his kids' birthday parties and asking me to join him for occasional weekend activities. I usually say yes, and we have pleasant enough times, but there's still a guardedness on my part that I'm not sure will ever fully go away. My sister and I have found an equilibrium where we're friendly but not particularly close. She's stopped making comments about my life choices, but she's also stopped showing much interest in my actual life. We coexist at family events without tension, which is probably the best outcome I could have hoped for. The most unexpected development has been with extended family. Cousins, aunts, and uncles who witnessed years of subtle family dynamics have been much more openly supportive since my success became obvious. Several have reached out to rebuild connections that had been overshadowed by the main family tension. My cousin who left that Instagram comment has become a genuine friend. She's asked me to mentor her teenage son, who's interested in web development, and we've built the kind of relationship I always wished I'd had with my immediate family members. But perhaps the most important change has been internal. I no longer need my family's validation or approval. The success feels complete and satisfying on its own terms, celebrated by people who knew me before I had anything to prove. The condo has become more than just a symbol of financial achievement. It's become a space where I host the relationships that actually matter to me. I've had birthday parties there, holiday celebrations with chosen family, and quiet evenings with people who've supported me through various challenges. Recently, a friend asked me if I regretted the way I'd handled the original situation, whether I wished I'd been more inclusive or tried to repair the relationships before taking such a dramatic step. The honest answer is no. Being excluded from my own success celebration forced my family to confront how they'd been treating me for years. Without that shock, I think they would have continued the same patterns indefinitely, always assuming I'd be grateful for whatever scraps of respect they were willing to offer. The party wasn't really about revenge, although it certainly felt satisfying at the time. It was about refusing to accept a role that had been assigned to me without my consent, the role of the family disappointment who should be grateful for tolerance instead of expecting genuine support. Now, when I look back at those Instagram comments from the original party, they still make me smile. Not because they humiliated my family, but because they captured a moment when people who actually knew me were celebrating something I'd worked hard to achieve. The real victory wasn't proving my family wrong about my capabilities. It was discovering that I didn't need their validation to feel proud of my accomplishments. That realization has been worth more than any apology or attempt at reconciliation they could offer.